Welcome to the first virtual rally from Throne Dynamics. We will begin the rally in a few moments. Welcome to the first virtual rally from Throne Dynamics. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Ivan Throne. I'm the founder and chief executive manager of the company. For those of you who have not yet become familiar with our work and what we do, Throne Dynamics is a non-state actor in the fourth generation warfare environment of this growing third world war that we all face today. It's worth taking a moment to elaborate just a bit on what we mean by fourth generation warfare, but that's often misunderstood. Today, you'll see men talk about fifth generation, sixth generation, and I think even seventh generation warfare has been bandied about. Be that as it may, fourth generation warfare has a very specific meaning and presentation, according to Mr. Land, who is the originator of that theory and who's worked with the company on some of this. The state has three primary pillars of responsibility to the people. The first is sustenance and provision, there's safety and security, and then there's identity and meaning. Now, when these things fail to be provided, when the state abrogates its duty and its responsibility, and it begins to rot, then the terrain itself changes, and fourth generation warfare truly is a form of terrain rather than a strategy. As the state's legitimacy begins to rot, the barrier to entry for other contenders becomes thinner, and it's easier for them to break through and provide an alternative to the state. The best example of this at scale would be Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah began as an armed group during the Civil War. Subsequently, today, they have hundreds of thousands of troops that send them overseas. They have hospitals, universities, schools, courts. Although the West often refers to them as terrorists, perhaps a better definition would be that provided by the Russian Federation, which calls them a legitimate social and political force. If we scale this down, perhaps to examples that we're all familiar with, if you think of a so-called one percenter or outlaw motorcycle club, all-male block where the clubhouse is, they serve the function of the state, similarly to organized crime on their cul-de-sac where they own all the houses. If you're mugged there, you don't go to the police, you go to your local enforcers who have become the state. So this is just an example here of what we're talking about when we mean that fourth generation warfare terrain, where the state has lost its ability to inspire. There's no identity and meaning anymore. It's lost its ability to reassure people with sustenance and provision. Inflation and debt and other economic travails are widespread. Safety and security as well have been destroyed, and men no longer trust the justice system. It's not even a legal system anymore, but rather a patronage system where preferred classes and entities compete with those who are not so favored. Now, in this environment that we see today in the United States and in Western Europe, and indeed Canada and most of the West, one of the things that the company is known for, and what brings part of our expertise to the fore, is our ability to understand two important principles. The first is that there are physical models that apply. We'll talk about one of those in a moment. There are principles. Here's a way to put it. The ninja often speak in the Benson Shuka, one of their tomes. Heaven has principles where men have natures. There are things that we know are always true. There's always timing, distancing, and angling. There's mass, momentum, and trajectory. Whether we can see them or measure them, they are present and they are there. Therefore, they can be relied upon to exist. Men have natures, sloth, greed, lust, vanity, and all of the sins of men. That's our fallen nature, and those can be depended upon as well. Now, where thermodynamics comes in with our physics models, let's take an example here of an avalanche. A slab avalanche, as it's called, where the deep snowpack underneath eventually crumbles and then starts to come down with a roar. We all know that model. We all know what that looks like. Nothing we can do except stay out of the way, get to higher ground, keep your distance. You cannot alter it. You cannot redirect it. You cannot control it or prevent it. There's another application of this physics model to what Sun Tzu called a combat of the victorious. It's like a pent-up torrent rushing down 1,000-fathom gorge. That's the same physics model, isn't it? Similarly, the collapse of empire and the collapse of state follows this model. And if you look around, you can observe it today. In the minds and the hearts of men, the destruction of our cities, the desecration of our culture, all of these things are self-evident. And in this environment, the company steps forward. Now, today, we have a number of questions prepared from the public that have come in, quite a few more than we expected. And the executive cadre, the men who work with me directly, part of the company, have some guidance and recommendations for you today. Let's take a look at the first question here. This was provided by a member of the public. What other things can be used as tools to break down in your attitudes to accepting clown world that I keep coming across? A lot of men accept being marginalized, seeing distractions such as video games, weed, plastic toys, etc., as a form of compensation. How do we break this illusion? It's a good question. I think we've all seen this. Friends, colleagues who don't engage any longer with the world, black-pilled, if you will, and are content to drug themselves, marginalize themselves, remove themselves from contention in society. One of the ways to understand how to counteract this, to examine that very word of compensation. There is nothing that is worth your freedom, your conscience, or your dignity. Bring men that you wish to reach to direct understanding. It will be difficult. You can do it when they're distracted. You can do it when they're drugged, depending on how conscious they are. You don't need to find the perfect moment. You simply need to reach them and have a discussion directly from heart to heart. That's my best advice to you. All men have a desire to love. They may cover it, they may ignore it, they may deny or pretend it's not there. If you hold a knife to their throat, they'll fight you for it. That's that spirit that you have to engage in then. Now, how does one navigate the gaps left by the state? It is failing to provide safety and security while maintaining overwhelming cruelty and reach. It's not appropriate to make yourself a target unless you have planned mitigations or are drawn to martyrdom. Now, these gaps in the state, let's examine those. What are those gaps? We see gaps of strategy, where the United States is continuing to push funds and ridiculous political statements towards Ukraine. They're not going to win the war. There's gaps of intelligence and idiocy, gaps of posture. But most important, unless you're planning to be a martyr, which we don't advise, and you can't mitigate the overwhelming onslaught of the state with its printed trillions. Be intelligent. Know what triggers the state. Often it's not the actual breaking of a law that triggers it, but the accumulation of things such as wealth, power, authority, and influence. When you expose any of those four things, contending power will take notice. The state will raid your wealth. The state will attempt to co-opt your influence. It will conflict directly with your power, and it will strip you of your authority. Watch those factors. Now, the rotted deep state, along with a long list of contending adversaries, do not believe that self-governance is possible, let alone attainable. The globalists would have us believe that it's a lost art, that those standards are devoid in this age of desecration. Are they wrong? It's often said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all others. Although it's a catchy slogan, that's not exactly true. Most of the ancient philosophers felt that a benevolent monarchy was the most successful, a benevolent dictatorship. Now, that's easier said than done, and we're not going to debate which form of government is best, but rather to understand where the globalist elites are coming from. You have to understand that above all things, it comes from fear. Fear of you, fear of consequence, for their crimes, for their depredations, fear of death, what transhumanism is all about. And when men operate from fear, it's easy to lead them, just as the populations of our countries today are led through fear. Fear of viruses, fear of Russia, fear of all of these various bogeymen and created, and we have global warming, we have the genocides that are conducted, and I use that word facetiously when I'm thinking of the trans genocide or genocide against intersectional people. A real genocide is taking place today across this planet. That's part of the accountability fear they have as well. So their fear is designed to remove from you the ability to challenge them. Keep people occupied with foreign wars, domestic drugs, entertainment, bread, and circuses. The concept of self-government does require an educated and virtuous people. So has that been destroyed with mass immigration? It's getting there, but it's not finished yet. There still is the opportunity to reverse this. It takes fighting will, and it takes seizure of the state by those who are opposed to this desecration, degradation, and destruction. Now, what are some less anti-fragility strategies and practices people can incorporate? It's easy to get sucked into prepping or just think that stacks of cash will solve things. Now, above all, the most important thing that you can do is to bring a committed heart, a clear mind, and direct action to your work of developing the survival, the momentum, and the triumph that you need. In your relationships with your neighbors, with your colleagues, with your friends, and your family, you must strip illusion, the hope that things will be okay. And just as they say, the 5 most dangerous words in medicine, maybe it will go away. The same thing when you bear duty of the state as an individual citizen. That's where government of the people comes from, works with. And we, the people, every single one of us, If we delegate power to the state, then we bear original duty of it. Now, from that standpoint of lists and strategies, don't depend on having stored resources. Depend on relationships. Don't depend on reservoirs of cash so much. Depend on the flow of it. Find systems rather than stockpiles. And always cultivate more and more overlapping support mechanisms for each. Connect your friends. Connect your colleagues. Teach your family and your children. These are the things that will sustain you far more than hoarding or being fixed in place. Now, this is an interesting question that came in. Can there be possible assurance that until comfortable or appropriate, one can operate in the dark with the company? Ultimately, this is a question of privacy. And take a step back for a moment. Think about what we do in the terrain we operate in. The executive cadre works on every continent except Antarctica. We have clients all over the world, and our discretion and our care for that privacy is of profound importance to us. But more importantly, when we speak of militants and the movement and growing the ranks of men that we do, we are not risking them through foolish action, pushing them forward to become martyrs or take steps that don't accord with their prerogative to choose for themselves whether to build, fight, or lead in this new age. Now, if a man does not choose to do either of those things, but rather wishes to sit as a bystander, that's fine. That's his choice as well. I'll leave you behind on the road. But ultimately, your break of concealment, revelation, as it were, of your plans, your intentions, your actions, is up to you. Our job as the company is to further your success, not to create spectacle. Now, how does a militant survive and/or thrive in absolute adversity? Let's speak a bit here about the adversity and the circumstances faced by some of the background that comes to the company. The ninja training that was a part of my upbringing and growth as a young adult, and still today as a practitioner, stems from a crucible of one of the worst periods in human history. Imagine a country the size of California, where most was not inhabitable due to the mountainous terrain, and 400 years of direct civil war with no concept of human rights. And even to surrender was so disgraceful that you'd be butchered. In this circumstance, men who had the determination to live freely, to be unbound in their conscience, in that freedom, and to maintain their dignity as human beings in the face of the worst and most unimaginable horrors that men inflict upon each other. The other background of my family, for many, many centuries, we served the British Crown as advisors through peace and war, from family to family, dynasty to dynasty. And up close, you see the reality that men remain men, regardless of their rank or their station. And the way to face adversity, above all things, is not to inflate it with magical thinking, with fears that don't truly belong at the level of resonance you place them. It's very easy to think sometimes that your adversary is all-knowing, has perfect information, and ideal planning. And that's not the case. There is always a gap. So even when it feels that there is ultimate adversity, know that you have the opportunity to love and to win if you have the will to do so. Now, how can one be courageous in the face of fear or natural or learned timidity? To use biblical analogies, losing attachment to the world, such as the known, albeit corrupt system, or its cousin, being neither hot nor cold, but a nauseating lukewarm. How do you build that fortitude to lose your attachments or fully commit? Understanding, again, this concept that heaven has principles and men have natures often gives you a guide to finding the correct path to choose from. Let's revisit this concept of principles again with a ninja called Makoto, or sincere truth, things that cannot not be. Best example is the equinoxes. Because the turn of the seasons exist, we know that central day of summer or winter is for granted. It has to be there. Even if we can't measure the time, the hour, the day itself, there's always that absolute apogee of every curve. Now, similarly, with natures, men will betray. Men will engage in sloth and vanity and lust and all of these things. When you understand the physical models of how this world works, and you, through experience, see how men interact with this world, you learn to predict and see. It's easy to understand what happens when consequences coming. Men deny it and seek to evade. That's just one example. What happens when unearned wealth is provided to someone who does not deserve it? They begin to resent themselves, they feel guilt, and they squander. These behaviors and these principles work together in such a way to give you the method to see clearly and thereby make your decisions of conscience. And that's really where you have to turn. What does your heart truly tell you? And that weighing of right and wrong, you do know. You may be torn between your desires, but you are not torn between truths, whether it's leaving a relationship, whether it's starting a business, whether it's raising a black flag of revolution against the state, or whether it's the decision to stamp out treason on behalf of your sovereign Lord. These are decisions of conscience. And the way to avoid that lukewarmness is to be clear with your conscience, to understand it, to exercise that freedom, your free will that you have to choose, and then with dignity to accept the consequence, and execute on the demanded deeds that your decisions have brought you to. One of the main things heavy on my conscience relates to the sheer magnitude of rifts that will arise at the state, local, geopolitical, and social level. While class warfare, competing syndicates, and critical continuity industries collide, whom can you trust or rely on to have your best interest and well-being at heart? Dead loyalties give rise to new loyalties and also betrayal. Learning to navigate that will prove to be a sharp learning curve for most everyone. Think back to a time in your life when you were betrayed. Do you remember it? What did that feeling of betrayal feel like? How did it affect you physically? Was it shock, surprise, sudden realization, truth that dawned, knowledge in the heart that's suddenly present? The shock of betrayal comes ultimately from expectations. And as a militant in this environment that we're speaking of today, expectations must be tempered with clear vision. Not having preference for truth. From the Buddhist standpoint, they will tell you that's where suffering comes from, is the desire for things to be other than they are. In Christianity, we speak of not my will, but thine be done. I speak of sin as being turning away from God. And repentance means literally to turn back to what? To truth. Resentment, betrayal, sorrow, and pain, all of these are normal and natural human experiences. You will encounter them. And rather than seeking to live so that you do not encounter them, or to prevent them, live correctly, with right heart, right posture, and right mind. Form your relationships with sincerity. Array yourself with dignity. Follow your conscience. Seek hierarchy, deliver order, and appreciate the majesty of beauty in life. Ultimately, you cannot control others. You cannot force or hurt them to do your bidding for more than a very brief period. If you want to look at a political example, Joseph Goebbels from the Nazi days, said sitting on bayonets is uncomfortable, and even the most totalitarian regime understood that you can only control men so much. The secret then to working through this shift of loyalties and upheaval of alliances and allegiances again comes back to that pure heart what the ninja speak of as magokoro. Purity of heart, sincerity, unmasked, face to face, man to man. It's not the facetious simply, I looked in his eyes and I saw the truth. You see the man, you observe his actions, you weigh his history, you calculate the risks, and you make your decision as an executive leader. That is the way. There is no magic trick to change the natures of men. There's no secret methodology to prevent betrayal. Only loyalty and fealty, which we'll talk about a little further on. Next question. I'm intrigued about the shift to offensive posture. Perhaps networks are going to facilitate greater contact between militants. Now, the shift to offensive posture of the company has been long in planning. Ultimately, the reason behind this is threefold. We have the capacity, we've built it, we've cultivated it, and we've planned for it. We have the coherence, lack of illusion, direct intention, sincere heart, experienced history of extreme enterprise leadership. And we have the competence to execute on these things. So why shift to offensive? Because defense is a losing game. Conservatives haven't conserved bathrooms. Make no mistake that the adversary globally wants you liquidated and erased. This cannot be prevented, forestalled, or thrown back through defensive action. So what does offense look like? It means seeking gaps, not merely allowing them to flow around you. It means placing legacy higher than safety. That means raising your sacred purpose greater than your comfort. It means making the decision to spit on your hands and raise the black flag and refuse to move from your prerogatives as a man in defense of your family, your loved ones, your community, your culture, and your nation. We are locked in an existential war. At this point, for the very survival of humanity itself. That sounds like hyperbole, but when you look at all the pieces together, the destruction of farms, the destruction of our cities, the destruction of our children, our identity and meaning, sustenance and provision. As our economies collapse, the United States has $157 trillion in combined debts and unfunded liabilities. It's beyond insane. It's simply not sustainable. And yes, that's on purpose. And the question will be, how can they do this? Because they don't care and they truly believe that you do not matter. With an adversary like that, for whom there are no rules, that is where the company comes in. There are no laws. Those of you who have read my philosophy book, The 9 Laws, will remember that. The 9th law, there are no laws. And it takes a capable, coherent, and competent leader to begin to bring the elements of our people, the hard dissident right, together and provide an overarching structure, planning, intelligence, direction, and leadership. We do not demand that the various groups that we work with give us control in any way. That is not our purpose. We are there to prevent them from making fatal mistakes. We're here to take their strategic vision and tighten it. We bring coherence to their capacity. We help them execute with competence. So they focus on their core mission. So my wife was asked once, what does your husband do? She said, he's a commercial fascist revolutionary. And we all laughed. But that's a way to think about it. We are the consultants of the new age, this age of militants. We are not a party or a church. We are the company. Our boots are just as hard. And the last question from the public that came in is, what kind of bridges with Europe does the company want to build? This September in Switzerland, the company will be hosting Flashpoint Europe, a conference for delegates of the hard dissident right from the United States, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, all of the various countries that have been suffering and groaning under the yoke of the incredible totalitarian systems that are concentrically oppressing and seeking to destroy them. We have contacts, of course, in every country within the European Union, the United Kingdom. We will be using those and leveraging them and bringing those relationships closer and facilitating the introduction between groups such as Patriot Front in the United States, Guzenband in the Netherlands, Vanguard Britannica, Alternative for Deutschland, Forum for Democracy, more in Spain and Italy. And again, the point is not to wage war, we're already in war, but to coalesce and bring together and make coherent a broader and more integrated effort of a united front. And then we'll see real fear on the part of the left. We'll move here. I want to share with you some of the things that the executive cadre has brought forward. and requested that I share with you today at this rally. Now, first, I'm here because I know that due to my nature, I'll never be accepted by clown world. I can't lie about the revulsion and disgust I feel when I come into contact with it, the way my skin crawls. I think that all of us understand this when we see these sexually mutilated, bizarrely attired, freakishly dressed and arrayed individuals, clearly mentally ill, yet are promoted as being one of the highest examples of our culture. I feel that same disgust. Disgust is there for a reason. It's a signal to yourself that something is not acceptable. Yet it's been tolerated for too long, hasn't it? And our entire culture now celebrates and advances and raises those individuals. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has destroyed our aerospace industry. It's destroying our medical industry. These things are repulsive, and we show that sense. You feel that as well. You see what you see, and you can't close your eyes to it any longer. It's incumbent upon you to recognize this and not pretend that it's all right. You must reach laterally, find your brothers, and begin to push back. Why am I here? I am here because this is what I am called to do. I can think of no greater endeavor than shaping the new world. There is a grave difference between having a mission statement and objectives, between having goals and plans and having sacred purpose. The demand of your conscience before God on earth under heaven to stand for what you believe in, to sacrifice as necessary, to ensure that your legacy survives. This is what you are called to today. It's the choice you are faced with. And there is no turning from this choice. There is only fulfillment or abrogation of your duty. It's going to take more than skills and information, take more skills and information than equipment. You can't order survival and have free 2-day shipping. Focus on the appropriate domain, self, family, community, nation. And this is the message that many need to hear. Indeed it is. Start with yourself. Get yourself correct. Understand your duty first to yourself. And where does that begin? With your conscience. You must never negotiate with evil. For profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul. At this point, you're losing both. Begin with yourself. Build resilience into your family. Extend relationships through your community. Fight for your nation, for its identity and meaning, not for the political slogan of the day. You are not obliged ever to accept evil or negotiate with it. It's one of the values of the company. No parley, no quarter. We call on you to take this same posture of the militant. As a militant, I have dedicated myself to grasping a linear appreciation for operational excellence. and thus I am able to penetrate and collaborate more effectively in my affairs and with others than before. This company concept of operational excellence that we speak of is kind of a business jargon overlay to soften what we speak of as cruelty in the affairs of the company and the work we do with men and the enterprises that we assist with and the leaders that we train. Cruelty is non-negotiable, and we'll define cruelty here for you. Cruelty is full execution without hesitation. There's no evil or malevolence involved. There's no sadism in this. Cruelty is to take every last bit of profit out of a venture. Cruelty is the prosecutor who does not stop until there is no more crime to be found. Cruelty is a sniper who has no pity in the execution of his mission and his orders. It's not evil. It is not pleasurable to cause pain. Sadism is not what we do. But failure to fulfill your duty, abandonment of your sacred purpose, these are unforgivable sins against your own conscience, limitations on your own freedom and your prerogative, and destructive of your dignity. As cadre, I have confidence in the capacity, character, and resolve of the men here, some of whom I've met in person and hold in high regard. Those of us who have endured the rigors of the last few years and continue to demonstrate fealty and contribute constructively to this collaborative effort to greater effect have my respect. What would it be like to work with men who felt as you do? Today, some of you on this rally are members of Patriot Front. You know what this means, to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who have decided along with you that to stand is more important than your comfort. To do the work is more valuable than continuous respite. And just like you, there are millions around this world who must put their same shoulder to the same wheel and work together. All of us bear the decision inside to the value that we place on ourselves, our legacy, our heritage, and our future. I decide mine is worth it. The men of the company and the cadre have made that same decision. And in a fourth generation warfare environment forced upon us with no laws hold, why would we not coalesce and form a movement capable of bringing out victory and bringing the survival momentum and triumph of that heritage and of that legacy to fruition past the monsters who wish it destroyed? As an officer of the company, I have much to learn, but it's with sincere fealty that I must follow. Now, fealty is a word we're going to explain here. Fealty is not an archaic feudal term here, but a very important two-way street composed of fear, trust, and awe as a shared experience. We're running a little short on time here, so I'm going to encourage all of you to go to the Substack that I keep writing, I'veBeenThrown.substack.com, and take a look at the vivisections of fealty, where I explain how that works. But most important, fealty is allegiance from heart to heart in both directions. It's loyalty, it's duty, it's love and recognition and respect. That's the true bond that builds civilization. Now, we need to make contact with other men who are outside of the superstructure that is being put in place by Clown World. Yes, we do. And today, the technology that is but a two-edged sword and the rapid changes in society make this possible. We're not bound by walking distance or driving distance or even flying distance anymore. You have the ability to find men all across this world and bring them truth, knowledge of truth, and hope based on truth that enables fealty between brothers, between follower and leader, between husband and wife, families and children, neighbors and society. Find them. They look just as hard for you. And know that you represent hope that they may have thought lost. When we hear at the company that someone is black-pilled, we are delighted because we know that we can lift despair from them. Men do not leave their brothers behind, and it's incumbent upon you to do the work that you have duty to do, to lift your brothers from the pit. Finally, what I want to convey most to men confronting this reality, perhaps even seriously for the first time, is if you capitulate, your fate will be worse by both measure and degree. There is no neutral ground. And these gears of war are mechanical. Refusal to pick a side is potentially fatal. That decision will eventually be thrust upon you, and without remorse. I'm going to close here today with my thanks for your attendance, the first virtual public rally of the company. We encourage you to think carefully about these things. What is your sacred purpose in this dreadful global war that's now breaking out? What is important to you? What will you fight for? Where do you draw a line and say, no further? How do you make the decision to throw yourself into the defense and protection of your conscience, upholding of your freedom, securing your dignity? The company invites you to join the movement. Be a part of our work. Take steps to understand these things. Take steps to do the work. Reach out. Find your brothers. Bring them together. Armies win and loners die. That truth is as it's ever been. We welcome you to the company. We thank you for joining us today. And we invite you to join the movement.